How the hell are you guys? Welcome back to the Halloween Horrorthon. My name is Ed. I'm going to be your host, and I could not be more excited about today's episode because we're talking about my favorite horror movie. But before we do, I just have one question for you. Do you want to play? It's party time. We gotta play. It's party time. Do you want to play? It's party time. We gotta play. All right, guys, welcome to the show. My name is Ed, and this is the Halloween Horrorthon, where today, as I mentioned, we are talking about what is my all-time favorite horror film, 1985's Return of the Living Dead. But before we do that, I want to let everyone know that they can listen to previous episodes of the show on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Stitcher, and wherever else you enjoy your favorite shows. You can follow us at Facebook.com at Mad Dad Movie Review, Instagram.com Mad Dad Movie Review, YouTube.com Mad Dad Movie Review, and of course Twitter.com at Mad Dad Movie Pod. You can also email any questions, comments, or requests to maddadmoviereview at gmail.com. So guys, I'm having a great day so far. Like I said, I hope everyone else is doing the same. This is the part of the show where we dive into the nitty-gritty, so let's go on and do that.
So, let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
Return of the Living Dead was released on August 16th, 1985, which also happened to be my first birthday, from Orion Pictures. It opened up in fourth place. Other films out upon its release were Back to the Future, Volunteers, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and National Lampoon's European Vacation. Opening weekend box office was $4.4 million, ended up with a total gross of $14.2 million from a budget of $4 million. So it made some money, and it's continued to do so since its release as well. I can guarantee you that. Let's take a look at the crew involved in this picture. It was directed by Dan O'Bannon, produced by Tom Fox and Graham Henderson, written for the screen by Dan O'Bannon, music by Matt Clifford and Francis Haynes, edited by Robert Gordon, cinematography by Jules Brenner, and the effects and makeup were completed by Tony Gardner, William Stout, and Kenny Myers. The players involved in this movie were Clu Gulager as Bert, James Karen as Frank, Don Calfa as Ernie, Tom Matthews as Freddie, Beverly Randolph as Tina, John Philbin as Chuck, Jules Shepard as Casey, Miguel A. Nunez Jr. as Spider, Brian Peck as Scuzz, Linnea Quigley as Trash, Mark Venturini as Suicide, Jonathan Terry as Colonel Glover, and Alan Troutman as the Tar Man. So let's jump on over to the Critics' Corner, shall we? Return of the Living Dead currently has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 91% from 44 reviews. It has a current Metascore of 66 from 12 reviews and a Letterboxd average score of 3.8 out of 5. The general consensus of this movie, I mean, you can just tell by the Rotten Tomatoes Metascores, it's pretty well received. Roger Ebert, for example, he gave the movie 3 stars, which is pretty rare, especially for an 80s genre film like this. He was quoted saying, "It's kind of a sensation machine, made out of the usual ingredients. The real question is whether it's done with style." It is. Other than that, I read a couple of reviews, but general consensus, both professionally and just from fans all over, this movie is very well received. It is very much loved, and it deserves every ounce of that love that it gets. Why do I love this movie? Well, shit. I'll tell you why. I love this film because every viewing is party time. I love it because of the hilariously confused way Freddy asks Frank, "What do you mean the movie lied?" I love it because it features one of the all-time greatest soundtracks. I love this movie because you think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life. I love this movie because of Acid Rain. I love it because after 35 years, that Bert and Ernie gag is still golden. I love it because James Karen and Clu Gulager are inseparable on screen together. I love this film because it's a little film that packs a lot. I love it because I actually give a damn about every character. I love it because it's the definition of a rewatchable. I love this film because the humor is all over the place and I'm all for it. I love it because send more paramedics. And finally, I love this film because, of course, brains. So, I guess I'm just going to jump right in and talk about the film's origins. So, little backstory here. In 1968, George Romero and John Russo, they made and released Night of the Living Dead, the great classic horror film. They made that together, and then after the film's release, Russo and Romero had a falling out, and each filmmaker went on to do their own zombie project. John Russo retained the rights to the Living Dead name, while Romero was free to create his own Of the Dead series. Originally, Russo was intended on making this film a 3D picture. That was a big thing in the 80s, you know. It was intended on being in 3D with Tobe Hooper as the director. Dan O'Bannon was then brought in to polish the script, and it was around that time when Hooper dropped out to do Life Force, which, ironically enough, Dan O'Bannon also wrote. Dan was then offered the directing job, and the rest is history. He accepted on the condition that the screenplay was his to distance from Romero's films. Pretty much, he wanted to do, heavy rewrites on it, which he did so, and it took 4 months to complete, because he wanted to make it done out of respect to both Romero and Russo, because he wanted the original script. He didn't want it to rely too much on Night of the Living Dead. So to do that, he added all the humor to distance itself from being a straight up horror film. And then in the end, John Russo still got a story credit, even though nothing from the final product resembles what was in his original script. And fun fact too, the whole brains thing, zombies, being hooked on brains, more brains, whatever, that actually started with this film. That was never a thing in any of the Romero films. Night of the Living Dead, at this time, Dawn of the Dead was already released. None of them films was always brains. It was always just headshots. This movie, you can't even kill the zombies. They go for your brains, and they're indestructible. I mean, as you can, there's a cadaver that they infamously chop it up into itty bitty pieces, more or less. It's got I think that turns out to 17, 18 bags of body parts in that scene. It's ridiculous. So yeah, Return of the Living Dead, fun fact, was the film that started the whole brains phenomenon with zombies. That was never a thing until this. Let's do a plot breakdown. If number one, if you're listening to this episode and you've never seen Return of the Living Dead, what's going on? Hit the pause button right now. Get a timestamp. Go watch it. And come back. Okay? Good? Watched it? All right, cool. So, plot breakdown. The film, right off the bat, kicks off with text. The events portrayed in this film were all true. The names are real names of real people and real organizations. And then it says July 3rd, 1984, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I've always got a kick out of the way that's worded, Eastern Daylight Time. You need a medical supply. The sign pops up. This film takes place in 3 places. That's it. They're all next to each other. You've got the You Need a Medical Supply place. You've got the Resurrection Funeral Home next door. And then around both locations, you have the cemetery outside. So pretty easy. I can't imagine just finding scouting locations and all. I mean, they hit a gold mine, because this was all this rarely happens in films where, a lot of things in movie magic make look like places are around each other, but they could be, there could be a house and then you can walk down to the next shot and that house could be on the other side of town, but you'll never know because of movie magic. So this film, no movie magic was done. They found all three places right with, in the same area of one another. And of course, like all movies, or most movies, of course, they had a sound stage for other shots. So anyway, back to the story. You need a medical supply. You need a medical supply sign shows up. This is the part where Bert heads home. Frank, he's helping out Freddie, it's his first day on the job. They're gonna stay for about an hour. Frank's gonna show Freddie around. And this is when he pretty much gives him a tour of the area, of everything. And then we're introduced to Freddie's friends walking down the sidewalk looking for something to do. And Frank tells Freddie about the barrel in the basement, and that's when we get this.
Frank?
Yeah, kid.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever saw in here?
Kid, I have seen weird things come, and I have seen weird things go. But the weirdest thing I ever saw just had to cap it all.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
Let me ask you a question, kid. Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
Yeah. That's the one where the corpses start eating the people, right? Sure. What about it?
Did you know that movie was based on a true case?
Oh, come on, you're shitting me, right?
I've never been more serious in my life.
That's not possible. I mean, they showed zombies taking over the world.
Well, they changed it all around. What really happened was, back in 1969 in Pittsburgh at the VA hospital, there was a chemical spill, and all that stuff kind of leaked down into the morgue, and it made all the dead bodies kind of jump around as though it was alive.
What chemical?
2,4,5-trioxin, it's called. It was to kind of spray on marijuana or something, and the Darrow Chemical Company was trying to develop it for the Army. And they told the guy who made the movie that if he told the true story, they'd just sue his ass off. So he changed all the facts around.
So what really happened?
Well, they closed it all down, see? And the Army shipped all that contaminated dirt and all those dead bodies out. And they kept it a secret.
So how come you know about it?
What typical Army fuck-up. The transportation department got the orders crossed. And they shipped those bodies here instead of to the Darrow Chemical Company.
And then after that, they go down there. He shows him the barrel. He slaps the side of it. The green chemical sprays out, knocks Freddie and Frank out instantly. And then you have our opening credit montage to the melting zombie effect, which is pretty gnarly and still holds up to this day, I think. So then it says 4 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. We see Colonel Glover. He arrives home. His wife mentions making pork lamb chops for dinner, and it's pretty funny. And he says, I had lamb chops for lunch. And then you cut to, it's 7:30 Eastern Daylight Time. The gang's now driving down the industrial park with Suicide. They arrive to You Need a Medical Supply, and they have until 10 p.m. to kill time until Freddie gets off. So they go to the cemetery next door. This is where Freddie and Frank, they wake up and discover everything going on. They go upstairs, and at first you hear a dog barking, and come to find out it's one of the half dogs that's come to life. And then you hear screaming, and that's the cadaver in the freezer room. So that's when Freddie calls Bert. And then this is also the next part is the infamous trash scene. more or less stripping and dancing to one of my favorite songs tonight from SSQ. How does that scene go on again? How? All right. And this is where Frank tells Bert about everything, and then the cadaver scene where it comes out and they take a pickaxe and knock it down, start cutting its body parts up, starting with the head, and then at this point it says on the screen that it's 9:16, and there's more graveyard stuff going on, more shenanigans with the gang outside because they still have no idea what's going on. Then the next scene, we're introduced to the character of Ernie, who is embalming he's working on a corpse's rigor mortis. And then Bert and the other two come in. Bert asks Ernie for a favor, says that he has rabid weasels. And then after some back and forth for a few minutes, they break down, and Bert ends up telling Ernie what's going on. So now Ernie's involved in all of this. And then this is where Tina leaves the cemetery to go meet with Freddy because he's about to get off work. Meanwhile, they're still at the funeral home they're cremating the body parts and everything. So at the smokestack on the roof, that's when the green chemical starts coming out. And then just like that, it starts raining. So what the rain does essentially is, and I'm not sure this is how it works in real life, rain comes, the rain knocks down all the chemicals into the ground. The chemical seeps through into the ground 6 feet under and starts resurrecting zombies. Well, you don't see them coming out yet. You just see a really cool effect of rain coming down. It's really cool going down. You see it going underground, and then you see it dripping through a coffin onto a pair of shoes. This is where Tina goes inside. This is where it starts raining. And the kids in the cemetery all make a run for Suicide's car because they say it's burning. Trash is of course naked, and she's suffering more than anyone else. They get to Suicide's car. It's convertible, but they have the top up, and then there's a hole in the top all of a sudden, and then rain comes in, and they're just not having the best day. Meanwhile, Tina encounters the tar man in the basement. This scene. As a kid, I'm gonna refrain because I have more to talk about this later on in the segment. So this is the episode. This is the scene where Tina encounters the tar man, and then the group comes in to her rescue, and the tar man ends up killing Suicide just right away. As soon as Suicide runs down to the basement, tar man grabs him, says brains, and takes a nice chunk out of his top head. It's pretty gnarly. Then the paramedics arrive, and the gang hightails it outside to the zombies appearing. This is where Trash dies. The paramedics conclude that Frank and Freddy are dead. They go out to their truck, and then they both die. And this is the gag where the zombies come, and the one zombie grabs the radio and says, "Send more paramedics." And so the zombies start infesting the funeral home. This is the scene where Scuzz dies. Torso zombie gets caught. This is the same zombie that kills Scuzz. They end up capturing it. It's just the torso, the top half of the zombie. It's a woman who's very heavily just decayed and is falling apart. They tie her down. It's a pretty cool effect because it's practical, of course. But the way they made the mechanism with the spinal cord at the bottom is like wagging around like a tail, and you see some like fluid coming out of it. It's pretty awesome. I like how I love the details like that the filmmakers, that the makeups guys remembered to put in there. It's little details like that that go a long way. So. They interrogate the zombie, and they ask why, and the zombie says it's pretty much they're addicts. Instead of going for drugs, they're going for brains, because brains is what takes the pain away. And they're all pretty much deteriorating. These zombies in this film can feel the pain, and that's why they're so hooked on brains, because it's just a temporary solution to their everlasting problem. And so, like I said, they go for the brain. It's kind of like a fix for them, and that's what they conclude from interrogating this zombie. Funny ass scene too. Trash gets resurrected in the next scene. Then it's a pretty funny scene. There's a homeless guy. It's a cool. She gets resurrected to pretty much her theme song, the SSQ Tonight song, like a slowed down, different version of it. So she gets resurrected in slow-mo, automatically spots a homeless guy out in the street. She runs out and kills him. Pretty cool. And this is where Freddy turns, because I should have mentioned, because of earlier hitting that smoke, ingesting it directly, Freddy and Frank are slowly but surely dying. They're alive, but they're not alive. I mentioned earlier the paramedics concluded that they were dead. Well, that's because they are, but they still have all their features, and they're still just functioning like you and me. But up until this point, it's too much. Frank's MIA. He's already hightailed out of there. Freddy, meanwhile, turns. He starts chasing Tina around because he wants her brains. Bert and Spider, meanwhile, they go out to a cop car, and their game plan is to come back and get the rest of the people from the funeral home, but they end up getting ambushed by too many zombies, and so they run. They shoot out of there in the car and just try and just chase the zombies away. It's at this point, there's a lot of zombies outside. There's a couple of shots where they show a big bulk of them, and I want to say overall there's at least 75 to 100. Anyway, Ernie and Tina are being chased by Freddy. He chases them into an attic that Ernie has in the embalming room. So they're up there, locked in. Freddy's trying to get in to no avail. Frank, this is the part where Frank ends up cremating himself. It's both sad. It's not really a funny scene, even though it's kind of played out comedically. It's a really touching scene. One of the rarities of this film. He kisses his wife's ring, I believe, or necklace or something. I believe it is a ring. He puts it down, kisses it, and then just slowly just pushes himself into the incinerator to Roky Erickson's "Burn the Flames." That's one of the songs that's utilized pretty intelligently, I think. So yeah, he's gone. Ernie and Tina are up in that room. I should mention that Ernie has like this German revolver pistol. He's obsessed. There's been people like fan theories and whatnot that that Ernie is like a runaway Nazi. I don't see the resemblance. I just think that he's just fascinated with some of there are people like him that are just that are collectors, and they're just fascinated with the history of it. So that's what I tend to believe, that he's just a fan of the history, even though he keeps a German revolver in his pocket. And in this scene, it's pretty subtle. I never noticed it for the longest time until I watched the documentary and they talked about what he does. It was kind of ad-libbed, where he's holding Tina, she's scared, he's got her from behind, and then he slowly takes his revolver and points it towards her head, like he's gonna put her out of her misery, instead of being torn apart by this guy who's trying to come after them, but ends up coming back to his senses and not doing it. Meanwhile, Bert, he ends up calling the number on the barrel, and this is where the Colonel Glover character comes back into play, and it's a lot of those mm-hmm, oh, I see, oh, I see. So it's one of those conversations where you don't hear Bert, but you just hear it all from the perspective of the Colonel. So I love this scene because then after he hangs up, he puts him back on with the other guy and tells him to hold. And he goes and gets in touch with another soldier, this young black guy who's pretty much right around the area. I guess he's just anxious. He's very young, and he's like, "Okay, sir. Yes, sir. I will, sir." And he's got this really bright smile on his face. He's excited because he finally gets to use the toy, and he puts in the coordinates, and next thing you know, he fires off a nuke missile. And meanwhile, Bert and all of them are still on the phone. He's still on hold, and then you hear just the whistling getting louder and louder. And then all of a sudden, Bert's just, you hear that? What is that? And then explosions. Everyone's incinerated. No one makes it out alive. You know, all the cops that are being ambushed, well, it's okay because now everyone's gone. Movie's about to end. Colonel Glover touts about its success and how they got everyone from a 30 block, 25 block, something like that, perimeter. And yeah. But what they don't realize is that all that rain is still coming down again and knocking what's left of the chemicals back into the ground, and we get a recycled shot from earlier when they get resurrected, and you see that white skeleton pop up with the human eyes, with its eyes open, freeze frame, do you want to party, end credits. That is Return of the Living Dead. All right. Now that I got that out of the way, it actually took longer than I thought or expected. Some trivia. You guys want to hear some trivia on this? Because I got some trivia, some tidbits on this film. Start with Trash, a couple for that character, Linnea Quigley's character. So on set, in the movie, it's the SSQ Tonight song, but on set, she was dancing to Vanity's Nasty Girl. Also, she was named Legs in the script originally. Couldn't find any information as to why it was changed, but yeah, originally the Trash character was called Legs. Obviously, because she's got the leg warmers and all on her legs in the film, but they ended up changing it. Don't know why. So yeah, originally Trash was Legs. Freddy's jacket, pretty funny if you picked up on it. It says "fuck you," but in the TV cut, it says television version. That's a genius gag. I've never personally seen it myself. I've never needed to seek it out, but I can just imagine watching a TV cut. Not that I noticed it when I was a little kid, but just it reminds me of the Die with the Vengeance TV cut with John McClane and the sign in the beginning when he's walking around. In the TV version, it just says, "I hate everybody." But yeah, very obvious edit. The Beverly Randolph, the woman who played Tina, her reaction to the Tar Man is genuine because she didn't see what he looked like. So that first close cut zoom shot, whatever it's called, it's a genuine reaction. It's pretty genuine. Jewel Shepard, she was cast in the movie after being a stripper who Dan O'Bannon spotted at a club one night. Miguel Nunez, who played Spider, he was actually homeless when he got the job. The eye test poster. Early on in the film, there's an eye test poster in the background, but it's not your standard typical, like the letters. It's actually reads something if you could look closely enough. If you never knew what it said, I've got that information right here. The eye test poster, reads, "Bert is a slave driver and a cheap son of a bitch who's going bald too. Ha ha." Bert was originally, the character of Bert Klugulger was originally offered to Leslie Nielsen. Obviously that didn't turn out, but Leslie Nielsen did go on to, he did come from Creepshow. So he did have those horror elements in the 70s. He was in a film called Day of the Jackal. I remember watching that one at Nightmare Theater a couple times as a kid. That was Leslie Nielsen, one of his more serious roles, because he didn't do comedy until the 80s. But it's pretty much a grizzly bear, and he's just gets torn apart in a scene. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Tom Matthews. So in the More Brains documentary, he talks about when he got hired for the job, as Freddy, he went and got his ear pierced in real life, not knowing that there was this magical thing called fake earrings in Hollywood. I got a kick out of that gag. Brian Peck, who played Scuzz, he played a lot of other various zombies in this movie. It just wasn't that character because he tells a story about how he was on set, even on days when he wasn't shooting, he was just there in the offices learning, like with pretty much hanging out with the makeup effects crew. Just wanted to learn more about the trade and everything. And he got the opportunity to be a couple of zombies. And that went on. I know in the sequel, Return of the Living Dead Part 2, Brian Peck plays a handful of zombies in that one. That film, I personally like Part 2. I know it gets a bad reputation, but I like it. I know a lot of the people involved in this hated the idea of it and therefore weren't involved with it. But I don't know. I kind of have a soft spot in my heart for Return Part 2. And Brian Peck was in that as a bunch of iconic zombies because a lot of them zombies have their own identity. Whereas this one, it's all just heavy makeup thrown together to a horde of, like I said, there's like 75 to 100 zombies easily. James Cairn, he brought Jason Robards in one day. There's actually a set online if you Google it. Jason Robards is a very, very famous actor who unfortunately passed away about 20 years ago. But I thought that was pretty cool and didn't even know about that until just recently. When I say just recently, I just saw that picture a couple of weeks ago. It's been that recent for me. But that's pretty cool. It's the cast. James Cairn, he was a pretty big name at the time, and he was friends with a lot of big names as well. So his friend Jason Robards, I guess he was in town. Not that it was anywhere else because it's L.A. Even though the film takes place in Louisville, it's clearly shot in L.A. He brought him on set one day, and so the rest is history. Speaking of shoots, this film was shot in 6 weeks. 3 actors in this movie went on to be in Friday the 13th films. They are Tom Matthews went on to be Tommy Jarvis in Friday Part 6, Jason Lives. Mark Venturini, who played Suicide, was in Friday the 13th Part 5. He played the axe guy in the beginning who kills Roy's son, which sets off the whole copycat Jason thing in Part 5. That film happened because of the Mark Venturini character. And speaking of Part 5, Miguel Nunez Jr., he was also in Part 5. Ooh, baby, ooh. I can't even sing. Ooh, baby, ooh, baby. Yeah, that was Miguel Nunez in Part 5. So that's cool. And Trash, earlier on, she foreshadows her death when she's talking about how she wants to die by getting, like just being devoured by a horde of just old men just tearing out her flesh. Yeah, that goes on and happens in the real deal. James Cairn, I've already said that one. Beverly Randolph ended up marrying the movie's assistant art director. And finally, the last tidbit I have is it was James Cairn's idea for the incinerator scene for him to cremate himself. Originally, his character Frank was supposed to go out into the rain with the other horde of zombies and just terrorize the rest of them, but that ended up not happening. And I like it too. I appreciate him speaking up and having that script change because I think it works much better the way it ended up happening in the film than just having his character that has spent the duration of the film just building up to this zombie character, and then once he turns into a zombie, he's like, oh, I'm gonna go outside, guys. No, I like that things happen the way they did. All right, so this film's soundtrack is one that I really personally freaking love to death. I listen to it a lot myself. The 45 Grave song Party Time in particular, and the SSQ Tonight, those two tracks stand out. There's also songs on there from TSOL, The Damned, and The Cramps. I have it saved to my Spotify account. It's something that I do check into from time to time. It's a real fun listen. It's got some really good and fun songs on there. So if you're a fan of punk in general, especially 80s, then this is one that I highly recommend. And let me take the opportunity to use the soundtrack to branch into the next topic, and that is the film's 2002 DVD release. So, like I mentioned earlier, this was a movie, Return of the Living Dead, that I consider, like other films, a Nightmare Theater movie. It was a movie that I solely watched whenever it was on TV, whenever that Saturday afternoon happened to hit, and this was the selection. Bet your ass I was there watching it at my grandparents' house. So there was a time after that when I kind of grew up, and this movie was not under my radar whatsoever. And it was for probably a good 7-8 years where I had not watched this film. And then 2002, MGM finally put out a special edition release of this movie. Now, when I say that, I did not know at the time that that release had an altered soundtrack. It didn't have all the correct songs. It had its own soundtrack, some generic songs on there, just other songs in general, straight up. I had no idea about this. It wasn't until a couple years later when I read an article somewhere that they talked about how this movie just begs for an actual release with the film's original soundtrack. So if I were to play that DVD now, yeah, it would stand out to me in its own way because I watched the shit out of that DVD when it came out. Watched it a lot. That was one of the first movies that I got where I actually utilized the special features, because at the time there were a lot, especially the documentary that was on there at the time. There's since have been a much better, more detailed one, but the one that was included 18 years ago, I dug. There was, I believe it also had deleted scenes. It had the trailers, of course. And yeah, just the film in general, I was just, like I mentioned, there was a point in time where I just hadn't seen this movie. I kind of forgot about it. But then when this DVD came out and I picked it up and watched it, boy, it was like watching the movie for the first time all over again, because there was so much that I forgot about at the time that, yeah, when I watch it now, now it's a different situation because now I've watched this movie so many times that, yeah, everything stands out to me, and I can pretty much pick apart and pinpoint, a lot of things where back then, freaking soundtrack, I had no idea was altered at the time. So yeah, it wasn't until 2011 there was a documentary put out independently called More Brains. It was a 2-hour documentary on the film, the making of and the legacy of this. And then they touched on parts 2 and 3 on that as well. Like I said, I like part 2. I'm not going to sit here and trash part 2. Part 3, on the other hand, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It's not a bad movie, but that, if anything, I think that's the movie that doesn't deserve the love that it gets. So yeah, the Scream Factory release was that. The Scream Factory release of this movie is this is the ultimate one to have. I have it. I'm looking at it right now, and this came out in 2016. If you were to own Return of the Living Dead, this is the release to get. Trust me. So like I said, 2 discs. The first disc alone, it's got a 2K scan, a brand new 2K scan of the Inner Positive film. It's got new commentaries. It's got a documentary called The Decade of Darkness, a featurette on 80s horror. It's got zombie subtitles for the film in their own words. That's great. And then disc 2, that's where it's at. Because disc 2, they were able to secure the More Brains documentary, so that's on there. A brand new Party Time featurette on the music of the film is on there. One of my favorite Scream Factory features, Horror's Hallowed Grounds, Sean Clark, that episode is on there. Oh, and then they ported over all the features from the 2002 release, as well as added the Return of the Living Dead work print, which I haven't personally watched the work print. I do know that it's about, I want to say 20 minutes longer, whereas I believe it's in high def quality. I gotta just buckle down and watch it. I'm surprised I haven't, as much as I love this movie. But if, to my understanding, it's a high quality version of the film, and then the low grade work print footage was just kind of inserted in there untouched, not revised or anything like that. So yeah, I'll get to that eventually, just haven't personally yet. This film was also known for its backstage tension when they were making it. A lot of things were going on. Watching this documentary, a lot of the actors compared it to just being when high alert. Everyone was on edge. You didn't know if you were going to walk into a dumpster fire or what you were going to walk into whenever you came to the set. And I think a lot of that had to do with the effects. I know the budget, $4 million is a pretty modest budget for a low quality, not low quality, but a low tier horror movie in the mid 80s. It's nothing low by any means. The Fog barely had $1 million budget, and that was 5 years prior, sorry. So yeah, a lot of tensions were flaring up. I know one of the makeup effects artists actually got cut. He got fired from the job because his product, it just wasn't matching what everyone was looking for. And I saw some pictures. This dude who got fired, he was responsible for the yellow cadaver body when it goes and it's headless and it's running around. There are a couple of quick shots where if you freeze frame it and you pause it on the Blu-ray, oh my God, this thing looks goddamn ridiculous. You can actually see like the human that's inside of the thing, and apparently the person who was acting, he didn't have the right body, for it. So it just looked all deranged and whatnot. And you see the little holes poking out and everything. It's goofy. I've actually paused it to see it myself a couple times. It's pretty funny. And the Tar Man was another one. The Tar Man's actually pretty cool. Let me just segue into something else now instead of talking about negativity. The Tar Man, portrayed by Alan Troutman. So the eyes, the head is like mechanical, but the rest is him. He's inside of this suit, and he worked with Jim Henson, so he's kind of like a life-size puppeteer. And the way he moves his body around, that is actually him acting. I think it looks awesome, and I think it adds another level of intensity and not scares, that's not the word, and terror. There we go. We'll just say terror, because it is terrorizing. The look of the Tar Man and the way Troutman acts, it just brings a whole new level to this thing, and it's great. That scene, when he's first introduced and attacks Tina in the basement, she runs up the steps and goes through the one board, it breaks, old 80s cliche. That film, that scene stood out to me. That was the scene that scared the shit out of me when I was younger. Because it's a dark basement, and the way, how she runs up the steps, and then the step breaks and she falls back down. He comes so close to getting her, and then he's smart too. The Tar Man's a lot smarter. Even the zombies in general in this movie. They run, they talk. This one in particular, he has the brains or the smarts to, when she locks herself in a closet, he takes a chain and wraps it around and pretty much uses, his head to figure out, if I keep on twisting this, it's eventually going to break and the door's going to give and I'm going to, get my brains. And that's when, Suicide and the rest of the gang come down and he starts chomping on Suicide's head instead. But I've always thought that scene just stood out. It's a key scene to me. And everyone in this film just does a hell of a job working with what they've got. James Karen and Clu Gulager, those two together, holy shit. It's legendary. It really is. They're seeing these two act out together and just back and forth. It's like Abbott and Costello. I love it so much. And then, later on in the film, when we're introduced to Ernie, just everything that Don Calfa brings to the character and brings to the movie itself, he just adds a whole lot more. The movie's already doing pretty good. And then when Ernie's brought into it, it just goes up a little bit more, And I'm not knocking on the film at all. This is my favorite goddamn horror movie. If I'm gonna knock it, I think I can. There are things that don't. It's not a perfect movie, guys. That's what I'm saying. It's my favorite, yeah, but I'm no dummy. I know movies are not perfect, and this is far from it. So, Tom Matthews, I grew up watching him as Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. In this movie, he plays the bumbling, dumb jock character so damn well. It's so different from Tommy Jarvis. And it's funny. A lot of the characters, the comedy works because they have comedic elements. They have good timing. They're very funny. A lot of the ad-libbing, because there's a lot of ad-libbing going on, you can just tell. And it's smart stuff. It's really funny material. Touching on the kids. So we got, like I said, Bev Randolph as Tina. She plays the quiet, shy girl. Pretty good. I question why that character would be involved with this group of punks, but for the sake of plot, I turn a blind eye, just go with it. And so I do. Joel Shepard and John Philbin, those two are together a lot in this movie, doing their own thing, kind of bickering back and forth. They're good. I mean, they don't wow me. I mean, I know I'm aware of them. And Joel Shepard kind of did a lot of 80s softcore stuff, and John Philbin, I know him from Children of the Corn, which was only a year prior to this, and he was a kid in that movie. So seeing him a year later, it's kind of funny. And Brian Peck. So Brian Peck, God love this guy. He was hired in this movie as one of the punk scuzz. He wears a long trench coat. He's just punked out, wearing the boots, the clothes, the gimmick, and then he's got a mohawk. Well, instead of using a bald cap and having a faux mohawk, this dude goes and shaves his head for the first time ever and gives himself an actual mohawk in real life. And so in the documentary, he's talking about how everyone's like, yeah, it looks good. And then the next day, it's like he just got so red and he had to wear a hat, and it just killed him. And I think that's pretty funny because all he had to do is just wear a bald cap, dude. That's all he had to do. Or just don't do the mohawk. But I love his dedication to the character and his drive. Brian Peck's a good dude. And yeah, that's that. All right, so like I mentioned earlier, this film did have a sequel a few years later, Return of the Living Dead Part 2. And pretty much no one from this movie returned except for James Karen and Tom Matthews. They're not playing Frankie and Freddie and Frank. They're playing two different characters who are kind of the same. They even make references throughout the movie. In the second one I'm talking about, they make references about things like feeling familiar, like they've done it before. And it's a great gag because basically what they do, even though they're playing two different characters in the second one, they're playing the same characters as this movie. It's two guys who accidentally get exposed, who'd spend the duration of the film just slowly turning until the end. And a lot of people cringe at that. It's funny to me how many people just hate the second film. Hey, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. It is what it is. It's all film. It's all opinion. It's movies are subjective, and that's fine. But you gotta have a little fun. Just loosen up, because that's what the second one is. It's in on its own joke. It realized, it's pretty much a loose remake of the first film. It's aware of that, guys. It's self-aware of that, which it's one of the reasons I think the film works is that it's in on its own gag. It's funny stuff, especially like I said, the Tom Matthews and James Karen inclusions. Part 2, good. Have the Scream Factory version of that too on Blu-ray. But Part 3, all right. So Return of the Living Dead Part 3 is a movie that I grew up I grew up looking at that box art. The box art in case you don't know, Part 3, it's just the the woman, the girl in the third one who's spending the movie turning, she's really into cutting herself and everything. And by the end of the movie, she's kind of like this Freddy Krueger-esque, just mutilated, pierced, just freak. And her final form is what the cover art is for the third movie. So growing up, not watching the third movie, I just knew of it because of this freaky box art, this chick on there. So years later, when I say years later, I mean about 4 or 5 months ago, I finally sat down on Amazon Prime and watched this damn movie. And while it's completely different from the first two movies, I still like the gore in it. It's got some really good effects. The story, I could do without the Romeo and Juliet zombie tale, because that's essentially what part 3 is. It's Romeo and Juliet with zombies. I still think the movie holds up in a sense. Like, the effects definitely hold up almost 30 years later. But the movie itself, the acting, I know it's a Brian Usna film. He was a frequent collaborator with Stuart Gordon, who did From Beyond in the 80s and Dolls and Castle Freak and stuff like that. So I know Brian Usna did the third movie, but and of course Brian Peck also returned, and he actually plays a soldier character in this movie. But other than that, it's okay. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not gonna rag on it. But there's a 4th and 5th parts as well that came out about 15 years ago. They were Sci-Fi Channel exclusives. Never seen them. In fact, I had no desire to see them. And it's to my understanding that even if I wanted to see them, I can't, because they never got Blu-ray releases. And to my knowledge, they're not streaming anywhere. So, whatever. To my understanding, there's no one involved from the original films. They're just standalone movies that incorporate the Return of the Living Dead name. So the body count in this movie, it's 26 people. I went off and counted all the people that you see killed on screen, as well as the paramedics, cops that get ambushed, and the survivors who do not make it in the end due to the nuclear missile. So in the end, I counted 26 people. My unbiased MVP pick of the movie, it's going to James Cairn. Who else is it going to be? I mean, James Cairn is just a saint. He's the best thing going for this movie. He's the funniest. His tone and delivery are great, especially the way he says, "Oh, it's not a bad question, Bert. It's not a bad question." He just makes me laugh every time. Who else is it going to be? Of course, it's James Cairn. All right, moving on. My Be Kind Rewind moment for this movie is the Tarman attacking Tina for the first time. I touched on why this scene is so important to me earlier. But yeah, in the end, it's my favorite scene in the movie. And of course, it would be my most rewatchable moment, hence the Be Kind Rewind moment. My double feature pairing for this movie is, all right, so hear me out on this one. It's Dead and Breakfast, and in case you don't know what Dead and Breakfast is, Dead and Breakfast was a little low-end horror film. It was a zombie movie, zombie comedy, much like this, that came out in 2004. For those of you who don't know, it stars Jeffrey Dean Morgan, the great Negan, or the comedian, depending on what you're looking at, as the town sheriff. David Carradine, the late David Carradine, is in it. His daughter, Ever Carradine, is the heroine. And Jeremy Sisto is in it. Jeremy Sisto is in it, as well as, who is... I'm drawing a blank. Oh, the singer for the Verve Pipe, the freshman. Yeah, the singer for the Verve Pipe makes an appearance in that movie as one of the zombies. But it's a funny movie. It's obviously a zombie movie like this, and hence why I chose that as my double feature pairing. Star power. All right, so I'm giving this film 5 stars. It's my favorite. So 5 stars, guys. I'm just giving out 5 stars all around. 5 stars. Yeah. So wrapping this episode up, before I get into everything, I'm just also going to remind people that they can listen to previous episodes on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcast, Anchor, Breaker, Stitcher, and wherever else you enjoy your favorite podcast. You can follow us on Facebook.com at Mad Dad Movie Review, Instagram.com at Mad Dad Movie Review, YouTube.com at Mad Dad Movie Review, and Twitter.com at Mad Dad Movie Pod. You can email any questions, comments, or requests to maddadmoviereview@gmail.com. And that brings us to next episode. I already mentioned it in the Fog episode the other day, but Friday I'm going to be tackling 1989's Pet Sematary. Another one of my favorites. It's a film that Madeline has seen, yes, but she's not here for the next couple weeks, and I know she only wants to kind of cover movies that she's seen for the first time. That's kind of the idea of the podcast, but she ain't here to shut this one down, so I'm going to be covering Pet Sematary. I'm looking forward to it. I might even talk about the sequel and that god-awful remake while I'm at it, but that'll be Friday's episode. As for next week, I do have a couple of ideas lined up. However, I'm not comfortable announcing them just yet. But in the meantime, just keep your eyes peeled to the social media, mainly Facebook, and probably by the week's end, I will have something up on there. Or I might just wait until the Pet Sematary episode and announce it at the end of that. Either way, I do have a couple of surprises lined up for next week that weren't already announced. One of them I am covering next week that was on the lineup for the Halloween Horrorthon, and that's Halloween 3. So yeah, next week I am covering Halloween 3. But as for the other one or two movies go, not quite sure yet. Other than that, I hope you guys are taking care of one another. I hope you're having a lovely day. I hope things are going great for you. Personally, things could be going better for me, but they're getting there. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're still listening, again, it means the world to me. Things are a little crazy right now, but they will get better. We will prevail as a whole. And yeah, guys, other than that, it's party time.